So let's go talk about constraints. We already saw this constraint here, which is basically, a constraint is exactly what it sounds like. You're saying this column has some sort of rule about it, as opposed to something like body, like the body of text, right, that exists on recipe. There's just no rules for that. You can put literally whatever you want there. Constraints is basically saying, like, in order for this to be inserted here, it has to satisfy this rule before I'm going to let you do that. So we've seen one. One was that there must be a unique combination between recipe ID and ingredient ID. That's a constraint. Unique, if you remember unique that we did earlier on the title of ingredients, unique is considered a constraint as well. Primary key, that's a constraint technically. Foreign keys, technically a constraint, right? Because you're constraining that this has to exist in the other table. Let's do one for our types, right? Because we either have meat, fruit, vegetable, or other. So we can basically say this has to exist amongst these things or I won't let it in here. It's essentially an enumerated type. And I use that word kind of cautiously because there's actually a separate concept in Postgres called enumerated types that you could also use here. There's a bunch of ways to do it. I'm just going to show you the way to do with this like check thing. So let's go ahead and type that into our table. We can say alter table ingredients, add constraint, type enums or type check or enums, whatever. It's just whatever you want to have it show up as, doesn't matter. Check, and you're going to say type has to be in, has to be one of these, a meat, a fruit, a vegetable, and other, and that's it. So now we have a check constraint in here. So if I try and do something like this, which I'm just going to copy that, insert into ingredients where title image type. So this right here going into type is obviously not a type, right? It's not in our meat, fruit, vegetable, or other. It's going to fail because it's going to say this failed, that obviously not a type is not in our meat, fruit, vegetable, or other. So it's just allowing you to set some rules and boundaries around your data. And at this point, it kind of bears mentioning, this is like one of the primary points of using an SQL database, particularly Postgres or MySQL, one of these, is that if you have highly structured data with schema that have a lot of rules around it, like this can be this and can't be that, and should be this and can't be less than this, SQL is really good at stuff like this. It's really good if you can give it specific rules of enforcing that those rules stay consistent. If you go into things like Redis and MongoDB and some of those other ones, they have some ability to do some of that, but it's not necessarily as built for it, whereas SQL is it just thrives on constraints and rules and stuff like that. So yeah, this is like the primary use case of when you want to use SQL.
I'm assuming that this would work similarly to the not null constraint, where you could probably give it a default. Like if you had a type, I'm wondering if you had a type in there that didn't meet that constraint, when you're adding the constraint, I'm assuming you can default that similarly.
Yeah.
The check. Okay.
Well, hold on. The answer is it's going to fail if we try to do this and we had like a, I don't know, spice in there or something like that. I imagine, and I've never tried this, that there's something to say like on fail, do something like this, on conflict, set to be a default. But really what you'd want to do is you just want to go update all those yourself before you do that. So I'm showing you all these like alter table kind of commands, just so you know that you can, once you set a table, you don't have to like live and die by that. You don't have to drop it to recreate it. You can alter them. It's really expensive on big tables. Like I remember when I worked at Reddit, we had to run like database migrations from one schema to another. It would take hours because the Reddit has huge tables, as you might imagine. It has every comment that, and every user and every upvote that's ever existed in there. They're huge tables. So you really don't want to run alter table haphazardly. Right? You need to like plan for it. You probably have like scheduled downtime and things like that. So if you're adding a constraint that didn't exist before, in that case, I probably wouldn't even add it. It's probably not worth it. But if I was going to do it, what I would do is I would go update manually all the things that were in conflict, and then I would run the alter table.